Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight is Artie. We are celebrating JCVD's birthday, Jean-Claude Van Damme. He's caused a lot of Van Damage, as it were, back in the 80s, 90s, and is still active today. We're going to be covering and honoring his birthday from the 1993 film Hard Target. And you know something, RDV? In the description, I wrote nothing but facts, even if I wrote them in a blasphemous way, because when you actually tally up the kill count, Wilford Brimley outdoes JCVD. I don't know how that happens, but anybody that knows the 80s films knows the Diabetus and the Oatmeal guy, and Remo Williams and a bunch of things, Cocoon. This guy could not be stopped, and he goes on a killing spree while his accent slips in and out. So John Woo, first time they took an Asian guy, director from overseas, and put him in charge of a film here. That was really a lot of the talk then. People did not know what to expect.
Well, yeah,
and at this time in the 90s, the action films franchises were transitioning over from martial arts to just guns and other stuff. So what was your thought about John Woo taking on and heading a film like this?
Well, I didn't know this till I looked it up. I didn't realize it was his first film, and I was looking at the because I want to see, okay, what else has he done? But on this film, they hired Sam Raimi to shadow him in case because John Woo had limited English. So in case it didn't work out, they're going to have Sam Raimi direct this movie, and I would have been a totally different movie from what we got. I'm kind of curious what that would have been like, because we know Sam Raimi's famous for doing Evil Dead, Spider-Man. So, but overall, John Woo, this was his first movie with JCVD. I thought for what it was good. You know, it's 90s. We're getting into mediocre action films where the big blockbusters were in the 80s.
Yep.
Yeah. So I thought this was a good movie. I mean, yeah, take your pick as far as what you like and what you don't like. There are people who hate JCVD because he's the pretty boy, and there's people who like him. I like him. I thought his movies are good. The plot stuff, they're watchable. They're not like not all of them are rememberable. But there's nothing better than there's nothing worse than the movie he did when that was Street Fighter. We can just next it off and say that doesn't exist in his role.
Well, obviously, JCVD was entering a point in his career where the cocaine amount was increasing a lot, and he actually thought he was a lot bigger than what he was. Not that he wasn't a huge star, but apparently he turned down a big guaranteed film role with one of the companies, and he kind of had some issues after that with substance abuse, and kind of led to his star falling quite a bit until maybe the 2000s, and then he hit the DVD circuit. In this film here, though, with John Woo, I always go back and say, the first Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise, was watchable and somewhat enjoyable. The second one, I didn't care for all that much because I go, oh, Tom Cruise with long hair, and this Tom Cruise, we didn't know of as being the stunt freak until pretty much this point. But it had all the John Woo-isms where a lot of people are like, oh, John Woo did this. Well, why are there doves flying around? Why is it slow motion? Because that's what John Woo does. Yep. And when everybody would say something about well, yeah, didn't you see Hard Target? And people would look at me like, what are you talking about? Like the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie from the early 90s. And they're like, who? I'm like, there you go. And that explains it. Because this movie, I have to say this. I agree with you. I think it's a decent film. There's some moments, I think, of, I guess, campiness, I would say. Yeah. Some goofy stuff that seems kind of G-rated, but it kind of almost has a little bit of a dark tone through it. And while it's a pretty simple story, they're chasing down homeless guys and killing them, and Lance Henriksen is like the evil mastermind. The guy who plays the mummy is in there too as his muscle, and so
I thought
it was a pretty good supporting cast. And the action scenes, most of it wasn't martial arts. There was a lot of motorcycle stunts in here and just some basic stuff that actually I thought looked pretty good in terms of practical effects. You and I always talk about that, and I went, wow, despite all the sparklies and stuff blowing up, if you ignore that, some of the scenes in here I thought were pretty decent early on. And it's hard to get over JCVD having the mullet, and I wouldn't call it a Cajun accent because he's Belgian, so he's got that foreign accent, but I liked how it looked. The girl's exotic looking, but they really made her like a 1982 kind of love interest or whatever. And
Yancy Butler.
She's been around.
Yeah, she went on to do Witchblade TV series, later on in this, but she had been in her own movies by herself. It was interesting to see her in this because I forget that she was really big in the 90s and the late 80s and stuff, because she's not really talked about. JCVD and Lance Henriksen are your Arnold Vosloo are basically your big stars in this movie. You know?
Yeah.
More so Lance Henriksen and Jean-Claude Van Damme. People forget that the guy from The Mummy are like, oh, unless you've seen those movies, you don't really see him. You don't know who he is. I mean, he recently Arnold Vosloo just recently appeared in Jack Ryan season 2, but other than that, yeah, he's not. I don't say he's well known by more people unless you grew up in the '90s and watching his films. But Lance Henriksen playing the bad guy works for me every single time.
He's the kind of guy that has an intensity about him. Some people say, oh, he's got a quiet intensity and his actions speak louder than his words, but he doesn't necessarily raise his voice or yell or shout, but he has a commanding presence like Donald Pleasance. Try saying that fast 3 times. But the same thing with Lance in this film, and I agree with you 100%, is that it's almost so good, it's like cheesy. Like there's the scene where we know he's the ringleader, and we get to see after the initial kill when they're getting ready to hire another guy for like $500,000 or whatever in the account, and he's on the big plantation estate, and he's got all the people there, and they're all just kind of watching him, and he's like trying really hard not to lose his mind and go crazy because he's furiously playing this piano and just going on and on and on and on. And I thought, wow, that's a really good acting job. Or even if he is playing it for real, I don't know or care. I doubt it. But I was like, well, this is good acting. And Lance is one of those guys that can make you believe in his intensity level. And he just has a nice commanding presence. He's got a very authoritarian kind of way about him without having to shout or bully somebody. It's very understated, and it's very good. And you're absolutely right. He's got some great lines in here. As a heavy, we've said that before. You've got to have a heavy that's convincing enough so you can have a good guy kind of match that. And if not, it usually falls apart. I didn't like how he went out in the film with a grenade in the pants, but it is what it is. I don't know. It's just,
to be fair, it was kind of like I said. It was kind of a campy. There's a scene where, and this is the most talked about scene when people bring up JCVD. I don't care what you say, but this is what I think. I always hear this all the time. He's the guy that punched the snake, right? Every single time. Like they don't acknowledge kickboxer. You're like, oh, that's the guy that punched the snake in that one movie. No, it's yes, he is. Because snakes fear Jean-Claude Van Damme. But Lance Henriksen had been in quite a movies before this, and then I believe he was in another movie, wasn't he? Was it Stone Cold?
Stone Cold, which is on the absolute short list for us to do. Absolutely, he's in that.
Yeah,
he had a bit of a renaissance here, and he continued, and he's still active to this day in his, I think, mid-80s. To me, even though he did a lot of films, Pumpkinhead was another one that we've mentioned briefly here on the Xtreme Movie Show. We've talked about how great he is, and I've brought up many times how phenomenal he is as the lead in the darker version of the X-Files in a show that came out in the late 90s called Millennium, and he's fantastic, absolutely carries it. So he's a guy that we don't talk about a lot, and I still consider him an A-list actor. He was in Aliens back in the 70s. This guy's been around. He's putting his dues. He was in Terminator. People forget that. He's in a lot of things, and to your point, he doesn't hog the screen, but when he's on there with what time he has, telling people what to do and all that, you can see him as the scenes progress, as JCVD starts figuring out the mystery of what's going on and turns on and starts hunting them. You can see him kind of starting to lose his cool. And he had this really long, you're the gun guy out of us two, you know him better than I do. He's got this really long single-barreled handgun that looks like an old gun. I don't know what it is, and it fires a single shot. It's beautiful.
It kind of looks like a Colt.
Yeah, maybe it's a turn of the century type weapon, but it was like he had some style in here. I mean, it wasn't just JCVD with the spur sound and the mullet and the earrings.
I love it though. I love it though because it's the classic formula that always works for me. Even though this comes off campy, when you first hear about it, it's like because he's the man bad guy and he has lackeys, and he's like he's like you can't do something if you can't get people to do it for you, you do it yourself. He even says that in the line. He quotes that. Like he's not word for word what I said, but I mean like he's the guy. He's kind of like, and for people who read comic books, Superman, Lex Luthor would be the guy. He'd get lackeys to do it for him. That way you can't incriminate him. He's kind of like the same way. He gets people to do the stuff for him, but like he's also a heavy himself though. He's like if he doesn't need to get his hands dirty, he won't do it, but he will. And I liked it how that fight scene between between him and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Obviously, he went out with a bang. Not the preferable way, but like I said, he's just got that natural presence. He's the calm, collective guy. He's the guy who's like, what? Just looking at Lance Henriksen, if he's quiet there, you are kind of afraid. What is he thinking? Where Jean-Claude Van Damme is kind of like just trying to survive. And then like you said, you get William Brimley, I think his name is.
Yeah, Wilford Brimley.
Wilford Brimley's in here, who, as we've pointed out before in previous, our conversations talking about him and through our top tens. This guy is a character actor. He's in like a lot of movies. He's a supporting actor, kind of like Morgan Freeman, before Morgan Freeman, I should say, probably. And seeing him, now this is where I think it got campy, is when they go into the swamps and they meet him. That's where I think the movie went really campy.
I agree.
Because I was like, okay, now this is just getting like silly. The guy's got the the bow and arrow and stuff. It's just like, this isn't like, are you trying to make jokes here? And then they got like the fight scene is inside like a warehouse where they store the floats for the Mardi Gras.
Right.
I was like, that, I guess so. It's New Orleans, but like, is that all New Orleans is known for? It's like, I mean, but it's simple to the point. It serves its purpose. And him being here, he added the comfort. He comforted Yancey Butler, character. And like I said, like I loved how he he took up the other lesser goons. They gave him like a good supporting role. So I mean, this movie, I says like most people look at Jean-Claude Van Damme, like, oh, he just does the roundhouse spinning roundhouse kick, and he has the horrible Belgian accent, or he's trying to fake English, sometimes just do the American accent.
I think that for me, one of the interesting things about the film was the whole John Woo thing, because I really didn't know anything about him, and there was a lot made about John Woo coming over, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, he's going to come over." And I thought, well, why do we need him? And
yeah,
especially back then, directors, from different countries, different cultures, definitely would have their own style to it, and certainly you can try to emulate it, but not growing up in it, I think it's hard to do. And he's done a lot of stuff overseas, and his style, to be honest, I don't particularly care for. In a lot of the movies that he's done, I'm just not really crazy about.
His other movies was Broken Arrow, which he did right after this.
Yep.
3 years later, and then he did Face Off, which I still say was a good movie, but only because the actors involved. Then he did a TV movie called Blackjack. I don't think I've seen that. And then Mission Impossible 2, which is either you love it or you hate it. It's one of those movies. I've heard both reasons why people like it, but Wind Talkers is good. Paycheck was the next one.
Paycheck I kind of liked.
Yeah.
And it's probably more the story. I think what it is with John Woo, it wasn't necessarily his particular style. I prefer in films, and again, this is an action film, so I always go back to John Carpenter, where you'd have a lot of single shots. You have the wide aspect ratio, and you could see stuff going on in the background, just the way things get filmed. And then here, the John Woo style, like I say, you get a lot of slow-mo stuff. And we've talked about on our other martial arts movies reviews, particularly on Back, I'm thinking of where he does a particular stunt and you get it in slow motion and you get it repeated like 4 or 5 times from different angles, and it's the exact same thing. You may love it, you may hate it. And I think with John Woo, despite some of the other action we'll talk about here in a moment, the way it's shot, it is what it is. I do like the action that's in here. I think it's done well. I actually like the fight introductory scene that we see Chance Bujo, or JCVD's character, come in, where the girl's got her money out and guys see it and he notices them, and it's shot kind of like a Western or whatever, and you get your slow-mo stuff. But I like that kind of stuff, guy going through the window, the guy getting the kick to the face that we see in slow-mo. I don't mind that. But when you start slowing down everything and you romanticize it, and especially when you're on motorcycles, it was like, big difference between the opening scene where the lady's father, and we don't know who he is, of course, but he dies. He's the one that serves the purpose of the opening gambit to let us know what's really going on in the story. Yeah. He's running, trying to climb a fence, and the bad guys got the motorcycles, and they do something simple and effective. They literally just pump a wheelie into the fence to knock the guy off and stuff. And I did like the motorcycle stunts in here, but it gets to where it's almost like too comic bookish and just too John Woo-ish, as I'd like to say, and it may work with the types of films he's doing over there, but trying to take that style over here. This is really like a film of John Woo, and JCVD just happens to be in it, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, you look at the budget for this was $19.5 million back then, which is really a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
For them. But then the box office came back with $74 million just alone at in a U.S. box office, not like overseas. Like most movies today, they do better overseas than they do in our country. I prefer, like I said, I don't really look at the box office numbers because we've been proven where actually some low budget movies that do horrible here are still good. Like what was it? The one in Ma, I think it was, or I forgot what it was. I think it was the horror movie where the lady who just wanted like the teenagers to be her friends, so she started targeting them. Oh, I forgot her name. She's an older black lady. She was in the Help.
Oh, yeah. I know the film.
Yeah, it was. I think you were was praising that movie for being a low budget, only like $6 million, and did well as far as the story I'm telling, compared to most of the other ones are big blockbuster ones.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think here with this film too, like I say, you do get a lot of action in it, and there is a certain style where it was definitely different than like the Chuck Norris style we've talked about, or Seagal, or anybody else too, even Arnold. So that was nice, but I was expecting more Van Damme to do his thing, and he really just kind of glares around and doesn't talk a lot. So I felt like he was a bit neutered in here. So again, it's the director's film and the actor stars in it. I understand some actors will sit there and be like, well, more of me is always better, whatever. So I just felt like, well, why is such a big deal being made out of John Woo when we go see this movie and you go, well, it's a John Woo film, and I guess if that's what it is, it's okay. It's a little different, but it didn't woo me, pun intended. Like, it was like, okay, if this is how he does this film, that's fine. Then when Mission Impossible 2 comes out, it's like, I don't need to see a guy riding a motorcycle with doves flying around in slow-mo with long hippie hair. That's not Mission Impossible to me. And that's this guy's style, and that's fine.
I blame that for the slow motion thing. Like that's why it made Matrix possible. Because like you see, they're both two guys going each other, like and especially Mission Impossible 2. You see that scene where the motorcycles crash. They're in the air and they're just facing each other and then shooting slow motion bullets. Like that's not really cool. I'd rather see a guy shooting a sniper rifle than see the single bullet hitting the guy.
Well, yeah, and it was the one thing too that we see that's prevalent in this film early on with the guys that had like the steel crossbow bolts hunting the first guy.
Yep.
You see him getting zoomed in and stuff, and there was not necessarily a lot of shots like that in film.
No.
So it's neat that John Woo had an eye for being able to pick out certain things and glamorize it in his own way, if that's the taste that you prefer or like or enjoy. But it was kind of like, this is different. We're not used to seeing a close-up of the artifact flying through the air and then doing all this kind of stuff. And again, I'm not a fan of it. I'm not saying it's bad, but I think it's done well in this film. But it's not a JCVD film. You could have plugged somebody else in here. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I don't know if that's good or that's bad, but it is what it is. And of course, JCVD would go on to do a couple other things too. Time Cop in particular, that we've already talked about here in the Xtreme Movie Show, as he was transitioning from the more Fists of Fury to more of a I'm an actor, rather take me seriously kind of thing, rather than something here. And John Woo has a lot of credibility, and a lot of people like his vision and the fact that he does bring something different to the table. I think you actually get this, and that's the weird thing that makes this film watchable, is that it is a different film with JCVD in it, and Lance really adds to it. Wolf of Brimley, like you said, it gets really campy there at the end. Other than that, the only news I've come across about it is I guess they had to cut this thing a lot because the motion picture wasn't going to give it its rating and stuff. And I'm like, I frankly just don't see it, because this violence is a joke. It's comic bookish
it is
certainly by 80 standards, but it shows you how far or how quickly violence has been de-escalated, kind of sort of, since the 80s with all the slasher films and other things we've talked about.
Yeah, I said Arnold Vosloo, he's supposed to be like the crazy kind of psychopath killer guy in this.
The mummy guy.
Yeah. I could see him if they did it more towards like the early 2000s. I could see them getting more violent. You know, in the 90s they were still trying to do. You know, they're kind of like they don't know what to do with John Woo. I could see them doing more about making this less campy, being more action packed. But if they did that, though, the problem is that it would get buried. I don't think it would have been like a big movie because even though as JCVD is, by early 2000s, he was going straight to DVD.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
But that's not a bad thing. I've seen the Dolph Lundgren movies straight to DVDs. People give those crap, but like he has a formula. He does it every single movie. And either you like it or you don't, and I like it. You know, JCVD. Now he's not really the main star, but he's been playing like the side supporting character that's still in the movie fighting. But you know, he's basically like bringing in the new stars. That's what he tries to do, and that's what I appreciate in some of these action stars instead of this like pulling a John Cena and burying everybody else.
Well, there's one scene in here I want to talk about, and then we'll finish up. Is that his homeless buddy that he knows, the African American individual that served in the war and helped them out early on finding her father. There's a neat scene where he's being recruited by the ad guy, the scummy dude, to get paid to hunt, and he's like, okay, I'll take the money basically, and he ends up getting winged, and he kind of outwits them a little bit, but of course he ends up dying.
Yeah,
but he ends up. And I just, for some reason, I like this scene, and I like this eye. And I don't know if John Woo caught this intentionally, but he stumbles out in the middle of the night on New Orleans street there, somewhere in the French Quarter. It looks like, and it's not a huge busy night, but there's enough people walking around. And he's been kind of clipped a little bit. And you see Lance Henriksen sitting in the car with the motorcycle guys driving their engines behind him, watching him down the street, and they focus on him, and he's going up to a couple people, and he's got his military jack on. He's like, help me, call the police, somebody do something. People are like, hey, I ain't got no money. He's shoving them off, and it was a nice way, I think, to show on film the difference in class when people perceive you as being homeless. No matter what you look like, they don't want to deal with you. Or if you're in a tourist area, anybody that approaches you immediately are like, get away. He tries to walk into one place, and it's like, we're closed, and they slam the door on him. It's like nobody wants to look at somebody that's homeless and like that. Not even
that. I think it's more because if you're in a crime area too, New Orleans is not, it's no joke. New Orleans has crime. It's always had crime.
Yes.
So when someone's, if someone came up to your door bleeding, and like, he call the cops, and like, some people will not let people in, and that doesn't matter what state you're in. If it's some people just do not want to deal with it. It's like they're afraid to get involved, and we've always watched, a lot of people watch movies. When you're trying to help someone, you get killed too.
well, we talked briefly about Lance, and I want to say here in the scene, it's a little thing that he does, but I think it's so effective. We see him sitting there behind the wheel when they focus on him in the car, watching all this go down, and he's just got this intense, non-blinking gaze in his eyes, but he does something where that shows that he's frustrated but in control, but losing it, and it's where he takes the palms of both his hands, he just kind of rubs them like on a sideburns, like rubbing his hair back a little bit too. It's not the typical I'm going to rub my hands and over my eyes and my nose and my mouth kind of frustrated thing. It's like he has these little mannerisms that he brings into each scene while he just stands there and stares at you and creeps you out, and it's like, damn it, Lance, you're really good in this. You're really just outperforming everybody, in my opinion, on this too. So yeah, I see Evil Black Cat has joined the chat. Used to love Chance's slow-mo running this. Yeah, there were some cuts in here where they would transition over, and you would hear like the spur sound, like the old westerns. It was Chance moving. And then the early fight scene that I was talking about that I really liked, the guy on the car, I think of the Camaro Z28, the blue, where he goes to do the spinning heel kick, and before he does it, because he's got the long jacket on, he takes his right hand and he turns a little bit, kind of like he was reaching for his gun, but he's really not. He's moving his jacket out of the way. It's so stupid, but it's entertaining.
Yeah, the long hair, I can agree with you. It kind of looks silly, because I think of these other movies, where he did Double Impact, where he had the long, the one brother had the long hair, the toothpick in his mouth all the time, and had a clean cut. So it's just like, and I'm thinking like the long hair in the 90s, like, oh my gosh, stop it, guys. Let Seagal have it.
That's the guy have the ponytail, exactly. Yeah, because the ponytail is different than a mullet. Mullet, and here in the South, you could get away with it. Let's just say, if
Well, you could do the mullet, but like it's just like JCVD. I think more women like him without the longer hair. You know, that's
shaved,
just,
clean, and I agree with you totally. He's a pretty individual. He's a good looking man. And that's where I think in a way this movie fails a little bit, because, like I say, he's not made to star in this film. He's in it. He's the main star, but he doesn't really talk that much. He's probably almost as silent in here as a Universal Soldier. Seriously, it's kind of striking how little you get of what we've come to know at this point of JCVD. You know,
right?
Even his action stuff is mostly the motorcycle stunts, which they're neat stunts. I kind of like them. They're done and shot well. They're actually pretty damn good, and that's surprising thing. It's like, well, we don't need JCV for this. I'm going to put in my stunt. That's the feeling I get.
Do you know who I would have put in this instead of him? And they probably would have changed the tone of the film, but I would have put in Wesley Snipes back in the day. After seeing him in like in Demolition Man, it's the only way he can act run around. I think he probably would have fit more. You know, I mean, obviously you had the other guy, the Willie, whatever his name is. You know, that was the veteran that went up to everybody else, and he still died. You know, but Wesley Snipes would have probably changed the tone more about this. You know, and he would have had it would have played more on the racial part too, and I think that would have been a more interesting aspect. You know, but
Wesley is interesting because while we've covered Blade, he's done some other things too, and I just keep going back to Blade, where I look at him and go, he's one of the few people that to me has successfully pulled off, you know, a comic book or graphic novel type franchise with the kind of action I think that we like, where it's stylish, a little bit campy, but done well, and it's not overdone like oh gosh, like the John Wick films. I hate to say it because those are super slick and stylish, but you just get numb because it's so one note. But
the only thing bad,
you have the story with it.
Yeah, the only, I'll say this real quickly. The only thing about Blade I don't like is the blood CG. Other than that, it was fine. You know, I like how they exploded or they lit on fire. You know, that's cool. Like True Blood, it got awesome. When they got stabbed, they exploded. like that's cool. But like, yeah, the I like Steven Dorff as Deacon Frost in there. You know, he's crazy little guy, little dweeb, you know, power hungry. But like, yeah, Wesley Snipes as Blade, I was probably the perfect casting role. But I said I would have loved to see him like in a movie like this, you know, because this basically is
actually a couple years later.
What movie? Oh yeah.
This movie came out in '93. And it came out around the same time as an absolutely phenomenal movie, The Fugitive. It's just an incredible movie. It's pretty standard stuff. Big fan of the original TV show, but that movie's got some magic with it. Tommy Lee Jones in it, Harrison Ford, you know the rest. It's just a great, awesome action movie. I wish there were more movies like it. It's phenomenal. But the sequel to that one, '98 or whenever it was, Wesley Snipes was in that. They did a second one.
Was that Wesley Snipes?
Yeah. U.S. Marshals, I think it is.
I thought it was someone else.
No, it's Wesley.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's phenomenal in it. He's great. It's pretty damn good. You know, let's just wrap up with this with Hard Target.
Yeah.
It's a solid film. It's good. It's watchable. Whether or not you like the John Woo style or not, it's definitely present. So I'm not gonna downplay it or say it's better than what we've come to know with JCVD. A lot of times people would say JCVD cannot act at all. Let him do his ass kicking. Whatever, we're not there to see him act like what some people want to say and knock him for. You say he's a good-looking guy, we want to see him kick ass, and that's what he should do. But yeah, as bad as this film sometimes is, because I don't think it's that good of a film, and I think the script kind of sucks. I kind of like it. I think it's kind of like a
grows on you.
Honesty to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then, like as Evil Blood can point out, this is one of his top 3 or top 2 childhood favorites. You know, I remember watching this a couple times, and I think it was like, man, it's like not only did I watch it for Yancey Butler, but I also watched it because Lance Henriksen's in here. Jean-Claude Van Damme was just a bonus, and I like the fact that he had to kick people more than once to take him down.
Yeah, yeah. I'll say this about Yancey, because she's got that Greek look to her. I don't know if she is or she's not,
Yeah.
but back in the '80s, almost the almost unibrow look was definitely in, bushy eyebrows. Now everything is pencil thin and you can't see anything. And it's like, wow, have times changed? Back when mullets were acceptable and you wouldn't get laughed at, and you could have these long jackets and everything too. These dusters, they were so popular in the late '80s, early mid '90s. It was amazing, and to see this, I'm like, wow. And I have to say this too. The more I think about the film, the more I go, I really like being able to see New Orleans in a lot of the shots, and it almost feeling like it's a character that we talk about, because you mentioned before there's definitely a lot of crime there. Here in Central Florida and Orlando, we definitely have a certain crime element. It's a huge tourist area. There's a lot of questionable areas too, and people want to call us the city beautiful and all that, but no matter where you're at, there's always that seedy underside that's just like a block or two away, and you definitely get the feeling while they're looking through what's going on with these killings and investigating before they find out that it's part of this bigger conspiracy from an evil rich guy and Lance. I think that New Orleans definitely shines, because if we're going to place it somewhere, make the place important. And in here you do, because a lot of it's in the French Quarter. You see some of the old history. Even the shootout with the second gentleman is actually in the graveyard, which I thought was kind of neat, because they're known for having, you know, because New Orleans is below sea level, pretty much everything above ground, and it looks kind of neat there too. So nice touches there too, and I'll give John Woo credit for having an eye for that too. Let's check out some comments here, and then we'll call it a night. Oh, Bloodsport and the Universal Soldier, yeah. Bow and arrow. Well, one day when we cover enough of them, we'll do bow and arrow films, the best bow and arrow ones, because this would definitely
There was one I was talking to this morning, because we are figuring out which one we should do, and I said Death Warrant or Sudden Death. That Sudden Death is probably one of my favorites. That's the one where he goes undercover in the prison.
Yeah.
Or is it Death Warrant? I always get those two confused. Because one of them is where
it was the hockey one.
Yeah, okay. Something that's the hockey one. Okay, so then Death Warrant is the one in the present. Then,
yeah. All right. A lot of people did not like that when I saw it, but I was like, well, I don't mind it, because take the same thing, put them undercover.
Well, yeah, it reminded me of the other one. Was that called Lockup with Stallone?
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like that, but a little different though. But those are always my favorite movies. And you put the good guy in there with a bunch, the overall on the odds, and he still comes on top. It's fantasy, but hey,
that's what we want.
Yep.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Evil Black Cat, I'm glad this is on your short list of enjoyable movies with JCVD. He's always entertaining to us. We'll obviously continue to be doing more of his films. Obviously, if there's any suggestions, we're covering a lot of Halloween type films. We've got a few in the pipeline. They're going to be coming out. We're also doing Twin Peaks season by season, episode by episode, working on that. We've got a lot of things extra coming up here too. They're getting ready to drop. We just dropped The Fog. Also too, I want to let everybody know that we created a Facebook page. Just check it out. It's Xtreme Movie Show. We're trying to generate more people coming in here, because, hey, guess what? After a year or so, we're getting enough people. We're almost getting to that magical 1,000 subscriber mark. So we said, you know what? Let's put a little more effort into advertising who we've got. So I just want to say thanks for everybody letting other people know about us so they can tune in for it too. So I appreciate that, the retweets and everything else there too. For RDV, for everybody involved here at the Xtreme Movie Show, I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good night. As always, stay extreme.
And keep on kicking it.